Testing, testing. Going once. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, testing. Subscribe. That's the chat. Can you see our transcription? Okay, there we go. Okay, just so for the people watching the recording of the lecture at home, we defined a function here called check if all checkpoints triggered. We used a sequence node. So to do that, you right click, use a sequence node, and all this does is it executes each pin in the sequence in sequence, right? As the name describes. First, it does whatever we plug into the first arrow, then it does whatever we plug into the second arrow, then it does whatever we plug into the third arrow. And here you can see we get all actors of class. If you need to figure out how to get any of these functions, you can right click and just search for the function. If you're calling any function on an object, like off of a variable here, you can just drag off and search for the functions. We defined all of our checkpoints as a local variable. So we see that here. And the way we did that is we dragged off of here and say promote to local variable. And that's just a variable within the scope of this function. We defined another local variable called lap completed. And then we loop through all of our checkpoints. And by default, we set it to true. We loop through all of our checkpoints. And if any of them have not been triggered, we set it to false. And then we break our loop. The way you get this for loop with break is you search, as with any other function, for loop with break, for each loop with break right here. Okay. And then we just return whether or not our lap has been completed. Okay. So we check if all of our checkpoints have been triggered. And we were just about to say, well, we need to reset all of our checkpoints. And we need to increment our lap counter. That's what we need to do. Now we have this one function here. This is a little bit clunky. There's a better way of doing it. We're going to create kind of the last thing here. I think we've gone through functions, variables. We haven't touched on macros yet. A macro is just basically a function, more or less, with a little bit more options. We have these things here at the bottom called event dispatchers. Everybody here is familiar with the concept of an event and a delegate, right? So you broadcast an event, and all of the delegates that subscribe to that event will get triggered, right? We're going to create an event dispatcher, and we're just going to say this on lap completed. On lap completed. We can drag this into our thing, just like we do with our functions and our variables and everything else we do. And we can call. This is just like broadcasting an event. Don't remember exactly what the kind of default syntax is in other languages. Different frameworks have different ways of generating and calling events. All of my experience with C# events has been with Unity, and they again have their own kind of bespoke framework for events. So we have this thing, call on lap completed. And so this way, instead of having to get all of our actors of a class and loop through them and set all of the variables manually, we can just have each of our checkpoints listen for this event dispatcher on our starting line, right? And to do that, I'm going to come here to event begin play. This is back on our checkpoint class, rather. So we have a starting line class that has this on lap completed event dispatcher. I'm going to come back to our checkpoint. And on begin play, I'm going to say get actor of class. Get actor of class. Right? And this is just like get all actors of class, except it's only going to return the first one. Can a race have multiple starting lines? No, it has one starting line. It has one point where you complete a lap of the race. So the golden rule is just be disciplined and don't put in multiple starting lines. If we wanted to check to see if the player has multiple starting lines, we could say get all actors of class. look for our starting line thing here, and just compare the length, right? Now we have an integer with our length. And as with every other programming language, we have our operators to compare. So I just typed in the greater than sign. If this is greater than 1, branch is an if statement, so it returns a Boolean. Then we could probably just print an error message here. And just say like, warning, the race has more than one starting line. Make sure there is only one. And we'll set this text color to like orange to let us know that it's a warning. And we'll set the duration up to, I don't know, 100 seconds so it lingers on the screen so you can't miss it. Right? There we go. And we can also get, that's not how you spell get. We can get an element from our array. We can just get a copy, right? And we just want the first one, index 0, right? So if there's only one element in the array, great, we get the first one. That's always going to be our starting line. If the array length is greater than 0, just return a little error message here. And off of here, we can say bind to. So this, we have our array of all of our starting lines. Ideally, there's only one. We get the object reference of our starting line and say bind to event. We called it on lap completed. Bind to event on lap completed, okay? This might be a good time for another sequence node, just to help clean things up. I'm going to plug this into a sequence node. First, we're just going to do our debugging message, and then we're going to bind to our event. And you see here, we have this little red square. This is a delegate, and it needs a reference to a delegate. And if you look at these red nodes here, they all have these little red squares on them, right? So all of these are delegates of different types. So event tick is a delegate, overlap, begin play, these are all delegates. Right, so begin play, there's an event that triggers somewhere in the back end of Unreal Engine that this event ties into. Okay. Now, does anybody remember from their work in previous semesters with events and delegates whether or not you can have a delegate with a different signature than your event tie in one another, right? So like a delegate, an event has, right, has a signature. It has certain information that it can pass with it. Can you have a function subscribe to an event that doesn't have the same signature? No, you can't, right? Because the event is going to pass through a whole bunch of information, and it's expecting to have a function that it can pass that information, and if it can't, it might throw an error. So just to be safe, we can just drag off of this event and type in the word custom. Now, in our case, we don't have anything that we want to add. We may fix that later. But if I just type in custom, it'll automatically create an event with the signature of the event in question. So you don't have to worry about searching for, you know, all of the parameters of your event and then go in here to your custom event and then find all of the and add a bunch of stuff in here. You don't have to do that. Custom event is not a great name. We're just going to call this on lap completed. And here we can just set our checkpoint triggered to false. And let's just print a string to make sure that it's actually working. Lap completed. Right. So rather than getting an array of all of our checkpoints and looping through them and setting them to false, checkpoint triggered to false, I don't know why that added a 0 on the end. That's kind of weird, and I don't like that. Name is already in use, on lap completed. Oh, okay. Oh, right, I'm using it on a different different section of my class has one with that name. Okay, so you should have an event on lap completed. This function here, super useful for getting a reference to actors without having to like create a variable and go into your level and select the specific actor that you want. We can just get all actors of class. Even this thing here is not mandatory, right? We can just add a comment here and say debug message in case there is more than one starting line, right? Debug message. And here we can add another comment. I'll just select all of these and press C and say bind lap completed event. Just the reason I'm doing this is if I'm looking at my graph from a really high level and I want to find what I'm looking for, I can see it in the comments, right? If I think there's an issue with the binding of my events, I can just immediately see what it is, right? Okay, that's where I'm binding my lap completed event, right? Okay, any questions about events and delegates? Should be a fairly familiar concept to you, yeah? Again, just the interface. You have this little plus button here called event dispatchers. And this is where you can create, forget what they're called in other programming languages, events. That's what I've always called them, right? You can create events. You can call events. This is like, event.broadcast. It's often one that's called, sometimes trigger, call. I don't remember exactly every single keyword that's used in every single programming language, but that's what this does. You can also see all of the other options here. Like if you wanted to unbind all of the events that are assigned, or unbind all of the delegates that are assigned to this, you can do that. You can create an event with the signature and create and bind an event. Yeah, just a handy thing to keep in mind. There we go. So let's see if this works. So we should get this lap completed thing trigger a couple of times. Let's see if it works. Let's first drag in a couple of checkpoints. So go to my blueprints, drag in a checkpoint here, drag in a checkpoint here. Sure that they're actually there. There we go. So there's my first checkpoint. I'll drag in a second checkpoint. Oh, now they want to show up. Okay. And I just want to test this really quickly, so I'll just put my starting line right here. Okay. And then this checkpoint, if we remember, we have our variable set. It'll let me select it. We have this variable here for our previous checkpoint. We can just manually set that to the first one. And we created this little debug arrow to indicate which checkpoint feeds into which one. And if both of these are successfully triggered, then our starting line should broadcast our event, and we should get a little message. There we go, lap completed, right? That's basically how you do the second assignment, right? Is then you just place checkpoints around your level, and you have a starting line, and when you complete a lap, it broadcasts an event, like so. And it might be helpful here in our checkpoint class to have another event that dispatches, right? We can say on checkpoint triggered, and we can call this. And in case we want to do anything with the checkpoints themselves, we can always just tie into this event, and we don't need to keep on expanding this on component begin overlap, getting references to a whole bunch of actors, and then all of a sudden, this one function is going on for miles and miles and miles, and who knows where all of the functionality is tied into one another, right? Using events lets you encapsulate all of the functionality for a specific actor onto that actor, right? Because the second part of your assignment is you need to create a timer that kind of like a stopwatch that checks the time of how long it takes for the player to complete their lap. We can take a look at how to do that now. But before we do that, I guess, is there anything that you would like to review from anything we've covered in the past several weeks of class, from blueprints to level blockouts to anything, before we proceed? Going once, going twice. Okay. So for our timer, I'll start by saying there's no right way of handling it, right? Everything has multiple solutions, and you might find a different way of implementing your timer, and that's fine. But we do have to approach our timer in a slightly different way. We could create an actor and drop it into our scene and have that be our timer. But actors are really meant to be things that occupy physical space. So you can see this here, like this checkpoint, this starting line has physical space. I can move it. It has this position, this rotation, this scale. But what position and rotation and scale does time have? Like, it doesn't really have a position in space, so probably an actor is not the best parent class that we can use. So if I come into my blueprints here and I right click and I say create blueprint class, you can see that there's a whole bunch of different stuff that we can create, right? We have player controllers, game mode bases, actor components, and scene components. And these ones down here, like player controllers, game mode bases, and actor components, they don't have a transform. They just kind of exist everywhere, right? And we already have in our project, in our template, a game mode here. If I double click on this, you'll see it's just like a data blueprint. I can click on this here and say open full blueprint editor, and you can see it's familiar. We have a viewport and all of this, but I can't drag this game mode into the world. Like there's nothing. It exists everywhere, and we can only have one. It's a singleton class. And we can see where this game mode is applied. This is something we went over probably like the second or third class. If we open up our world settings, so you might have this open up by default, or you can go to Window and World Settings. And you can see I have this World Settings window. If it will let me pull this up, I'll just drag it out here. Okay. We have this World Settings window, and you can see that we can set our game mode here. We can only set one game mode per level, right? So we could either extend our game mode. So we could double click on this and we have our event graph, and we could go and implement whatever we want to do for our timer here and all of our functions. Or, right, if we remember, I'll just open up again another blueprint here. All of our blueprints are made up of components, right? So these are kind of self-contained modular pieces that we can use to build functionality piecemeal. We can also create an actor component to be our timer. So that's what I'm going to do here. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You could go into your game mode here and just build a timer into your game mode. You could build it onto your player character. You could build it onto an actor and drag and drop it into the scene. Lots of ways that you can approach it. This is how I would approach it, because who knows when I might want to use a timer somewhere else in the future. So I'm going to create a blueprint class and just create this actor component. You can see an actor component is a reusable component that can be added to any actor. I'm just going to call this BP stopwatch. BP_stopwatch. And then I want to double check that I can actually add it to my game mode. Let's just be safe. And we can add our stopwatch component to our game mode. And this is nice because as we define functions on this, we can just close these down. We can just drag and drop these and then call our functions on this without having to, again, to have our game mode cluttered up with a whole bunch of functions that aren't super relevant in general. Okay. So I'm going to open up my component here, and we can see event begin play and event tick. So we're going to take a look at the event tick here. Does anyone want to hazard a guess what delta seconds means? I'm going to throw out any kind of guess what delta seconds is. Right, tick is called every single frame, right? So if we might be running our game at 30 frames per second, we get this delta seconds variable. Okay, delta seconds is the time that has elapsed from the previous frame to the current frame, right? So if we're running at 30 frames per second, delta seconds will return as a float whatever 1/30th of a second is. I don't know what that is. But just to show you what I mean, I'm going to call a print string function. I'm going to plug this float in, and it'll convert the float to a string for me. I'm going to use the delta seconds key so that it doesn't spam my log with a billion, 30 different messages a second. And with our stopwatch on our game mode, this tick should run. We'll see. If I press play, you can see every frame we get this little variable that it's like 0.01. This is like 1.6 milliseconds thereabouts, right? This is a pretty handy way to increment time because it's going to give us a very exact measure of time, right? So we can create a variable. It's returning a float. We can create a variable here, and we can call this like total time. And I like to add measures of time. If any time you're doing like an actual like physical real world unit of measurement, centimeters, meters, seconds, minutes, what have you. Brackets, put your unit of measurement in there just so everyone's on the same page. We have our total time and we can get it. And I believe we can go plus equals. No, we can't. We can with integers, but not floats. So we can get it and we can set it. And we can set it to its previous value plus delta seconds. All right, so it starts at 0. And it'll just start counting up. Right. I can just add a little comment here and say total time plus equals delta time. I'm just going to go ahead and append a string. Appending a string lets us make a little bit cleaner messages, and I'll say total time. And then a little colon and a space. Okay. The main thing I want you to take away from this is delta seconds, right? Every single frame, you get the exact amount of time down to the millisecond that has elapsed since the previous frame. This is going to be, I think your next lab might have you going in and using delta time to do some other stuff. So understanding what this is and why you might use it is pretty important. Okay. So now let's see if our time is incrementing upwards. Should just be counting up. There we go. Probably a nicer way to do this. Set a key there so that it doesn't spam my log. And now you can see that the total time is just kind of counting up, right? Now this is in seconds. And now that we at least have our time in seconds, we can probably look for a way to convert this into like a nicer time code or time span data structure. We'll see if there's one in Unreal Engine. Right, so the kind of first issue that we need to do with our stopwatch is count time, and now we can count time, right? We can add a function, say record time, right? Record time. Probably want to output a float. Recorded time. So this is kind of like if you have a stopwatch and you press the button and it records, just says like takes a snapshot of the amount of time that was at the stopwatch. Then we can just get our total time when we call this function and return it. And I'm going to add a delay node here. We'll like delay for 3 seconds, and then we'll call our record time function. And we can string just to make sure that it's actually working. Right. Got our timer, it's incrementing up. We wait 3 seconds, and you can see it's recorded a time about 3 seconds plus a frame afterwards. You can add functions to start and stop your stopwatch. You can add functions to basically do whatever you want to speed up time, to add like a multiplier to delta seconds. You can basically do whatever you want to this. But these are the 2 core functions that you probably need to do your game, right? Record our time, and we can count up. Now in our kart game mode, we have our BP stopwatch, but it's actually just like a component on our game mode. So we can grab this and call our record time function. And we might want to create an event here. Call it a custom event. And we can call this a, say, on lap completed. And just like we did with our checkpoint, we can say get actor of class. We can do this here. We could also do it on our starting point, on our starting line rather. We can say get actor of class. Starting line. Bind to event on lap completed. Right? We don't even have to change anything on our starting line. We just bind it to the on lap completed event, and we can tie in really anything we want just by doing this. Get our starting line, bind it to on lap completed. Right? You want to play a sound effect. You want to update your user interface. There's a million things you might want to do when you complete a lap in your game. I can't contemplate all of those things, and neither can your starting line class, and it shouldn't have to. All your starting line class has to do is determine if a player has completed a race and dispatch an event, or I guess a lap of their race, dispatch an event if they've completed a lap. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, memory serves. The assignment wants you to record an array of recorded times when you've completed a lap. So we can create a variable, and we can call this lap times, and make it into a float. And just like we did with our guy jumping up and down, displaying different messages, we can come to the right here where there's this little pill drop down. We grab the little pill and we convert it into an array. We go in here, we can get it, and we can add our time to our array. I don't know if append. I think add is the same thing as append. Yeah. And there we go. You've pretty much just completed the second assignment if you followed along. Right? And you have, I think, 5 weeks to do your second assignment. You can kind of make this as fun as you want. You can make this as, you can have it record the time for every checkpoint that they passed and display all of the checkpoint times when they complete the lap. You can do it any way you want. This is the basic way of doing it. So let's see if it actually works. Okay, we got our record time. We don't actually want to record time on begin play anymore. And we got our game mode, lap completed, on lap complete, record time. And we'll just print our recorded time as well. Actually, we'll print the length of this array. Index of the newly added item. Just to make sure that it's getting added to the array and that it's expanding the length of the array. Okay, we've got our total time. And lap completed. Ooh, it didn't print our string. We got an error. Let's see what's going on here. Bind to on lap completed, access none. Oh, I think I know what I did wrong. This is my fault for having one project with everybody's samples in it. If I go into my cart game mode, starting line, FS2, there we go. Probably just had it set to a different so basically, oh, hello. Error and error. That's what's going on here. Can't connect pins, target, and return value. Just going to try replacing that. Okay, so now we can get that working. And now it's just saying an error. We can't bind to an event if we don't have an event that we're binding to. File, there we go. So basically what happened there is I have 4 different starting line classes in my project right now, 1 for each section. I selected the wrong starting line class from this dropdown here. And then it was saying, hang on a second, you haven't defined this bind lap event on that class yet. So we can't bind to an event that doesn't exist on this class. And then when I went in and fixed it and set this to the correct starting line variable for your guys' section, it was saying, wait a second, this target thing here is expecting a class of a completely different type, and it was throwing an error. And so I just went in and created a new bind event function that has the right target type. Okay, that shouldn't happen to you because you should only have 1 starting line class in your project. There we go. Let's see if this works now. Fingers crossed. So we got our car, we can drive through. There, you can see the index that our time was recorded to was 0. Any questions about that so far? Okay. We also need to track how many laps the player has completed, and thus when they're not just finished a lap, but the race as a whole, right? So we can just add a variable to our game mode. For stuff like this, it doesn't really make sense to create a whole separate component for what's really like an integer, right? Why would you bother doing that? Right? We can just add an integer variable, right? And just say laps completed. We can change this to a type of integer, right? Because you can't complete 0.5 of a lap. You either complete an entire lap or none of it. And if we wanted to check to see if the player has completed sufficient laps to finish the race, we can just have another integer variable and just say total laps. We'll call it total race laps. like I said, 2 problems in computer science, cache invalidation and naming things. Just try and come up with a name that sort of makes sense. Is there a word for that? Anybody into like F1 racing or anything like that? Is there like a specific word for the total laps in a race before it's completed? I don't know. Anyway, total laps to win. There you go. That's a good one. Total laps to win. There we go. So we can now expand this on lap completed callback event, right? I'm gonna add in a little sequence node, right? Just keep it nice and clean. I can then grab all of this. I can press C and I can say record time. And then out of here, I can do a little compare, right? Well, we might want to increment our laps completed. So we can get this and plus plus. We can increment our int here. So this will increment plus plus, you know, I is equal to 0, I is less than variable I plus plus. You can do the same thing, plus plus, just increments your integer. So we increment the number of laps completed. And then if this is, I don't know, like equal to or greater than or equal to the laps to win. Anybody remember how to create an if statement? Want to throw that out there? Branch node, thank you. You can either search it in here. There's also a shortcut. You can press B and hold B and just click, and it'll create a branch node. So if the laps completed is greater than or equal to the total laps to win, right? Bring race complete. I'll just say you can set this to whatever you want for your race in terms of the total laps to win. I'll just set it to 1 for now to see if we successfully do this, right? So when we complete 1 lap, which in our case is just going through those 2 checkpoints and getting to the finish line, we should get this race complete message. I'll set this to like bright green. Okay. You can see the logic is fairly simple. How many laps have you completed? Have you completed enough laps or more than enough laps? The more than is just a safety thing, right? Just in case somehow you manage to complete the race without triggering this event and then you complete another lap. It's just to finish the level just in case, because I can't account for every single edge case in every single game. That's just safety. Fingers crossed that this will work. Race complete, right? If I set that to a higher number, like you need to complete 3 laps to win the race, obviously I wouldn't get that message. So let's see if that works too. Total laps to win, you need to complete 3 laps. And we can drive through and we shouldn't get that message now, right? Voila. Any questions about this? This is basically the second assignment. You can see, right, we've done a stopwatch component that has what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nodes, 6 functions we're calling. And then here, this is kind of where it gets complicated because you just need to remember that you have this on lap completed event generated on your starting line. And when you complete a lap, you're basically saying record the time and check if this lap is the final lap of the race. If it is, we might want to create, say, another event in here in our game mode and say on race complete and call that event. right? Because when you complete the race, maybe you want to open up a user interface to give the player the option to restart or go back to the main menu. You want to stop the player from controlling their thing. Like if you complete a race in Mario Kart, it kind of zooms out to a cinematic mode and an AI takes control of your racer as they keep going. They tie into an event that just determines whether or not the player has completed the race, right? That's the gist of it. Let's see if we can make the stopwatch return something other than a float. Because like when I imagine a stopwatch, you kind of have like maybe like hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. Might be nice to return like something that actually looks like a time structure, right? So let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to go back into my stopwatch actor component here. I'm going to create a variable. And this is just so I can see all of the different, we can call this like, I don't know, like time code as opposed to total time in seconds. Time, I don't know, time, okay, time code, there we go. A time code that stores time in hours, hours, minutes, minutes, seconds, seconds. Time span is the value, which is the difference between two dates and times. So that could be an interesting one here. If we grab a time span, we could record the time span when the game starts and then like subtract one time span from another and just like get the time span, or yeah, the time span when we complete a race, subtract the two, get the difference. Now we have the total time. Like I said, you can just like count up in seconds, or you can figure out how to do it a completely different way. I believe it was time code, though. That was the one we were looking for. Time loop. Okay. Time code, bone method, timer handle, value over time. Interesting. Time code. Yeah, time code that stores set time code, split pin struct, time code frames, time code seconds. So we could go in and set the seconds on this time code. Wonder if we can just also just search time and see what kind of time span functions here. Okay, time span from seconds returns a time span that represents specified number of seconds. To string? Can we convert it to a string? No. Anyway, this is kind of what you can do to clean things up. I'm going to try and set this time code variable from seconds. So I'm plugging in X number of seconds. And we'll see if we get a nicer. Okay, so the time code structure we can convert to a string. Force sign display. Let's see. Let's see what happens here as our timer now counts up. That's not bad. You can see it's just counting up in seconds there. It would be nice if we could get milliseconds. Not sure how we would do that, but at least this is a kind of a start. Timecode integer frames, timecode drop frame format. Wonder what that does. Right, you can see I'm just going in and just like playing around with it to see if we can get the look and feel that we want. Right. So again, you can record it just in seconds. You can go in and play around with this time code, total time. I wonder if we get the truncated, if there's a way that we can maybe subtract the truncated value from the total time and then get our frames. And yes, this looks goofy and it would be good to go in if your code looks like spaghetti and I can't tell what it's doing. That's not a good thing. You can go in and clean this up. It's okay if it's spaghetti when you're just figuring out how it works. Let's see if that works. Nah, it doesn't quite work. Maybe I can just plug delta time into it. Who knows, right? Because we kind of want to get the frames that have elapsed. Yeah, if I can, maybe I just search time code. We'll get some different time code functions. Time code to string, get time code frame rate, get set time code. Right. Any kind of questions about what I'm doing here with recording the time or anything? Okay, well, that's really just what I wanted to cover today. You guys are a bit ahead of all of the other sections right now. So if you guys want to spend the next 20 minutes working on your assignments, asking me any questions, you're more than welcome to do so. I'll be here, probably keep playing with this timer to see if I can get it actually by recording the milliseconds as well. Other than that, again, yes. On the print string node, no, it'll always display in the top left-hand corner. The next assignments after the lapse and recording the time assignment is building a user interface to display it in a nicer way. So then you can center it and put it wherever you like. Yeah, so again, we're done a little bit early, but I'm here to answer any questions. We keep kind of picking away at this and see if it works. And yeah. Everyone confident you'll get your assignments in on time on Friday? Thumbs up. Good. Cool. All right. And if all else fails, I'm just going to go into Google here and search. Hi. There's a lot. Just kind of like skim it. And
and I can choose that.
Yeah, so when I say just consider the angles, it's mostly just talking about what you learned. How can you take what you've learned and apply it to other things?
So over. Like,
Yeah, so basically it's asking the question of like, why would somebody take the time to make a document like this? Is there important information in the document? What information are you finding that would be like if you were developing a game of your own and you had to make this game as all of the relevant information there, right? Would you take the time to make a document like that for a piece of software you were developing? Would you do it differently? Would you do it the same way, right?
so it's good. Here.
Yes, and talk about just kind of like any kind of thoughts that come to mind as you're doing it. Again, do you think that it's necessary to be that detailed? It's mostly about getting you to think critically about what you're reading and how to apply it.
Okay. Yeah, just probably more the points, so that's why it's like there are some conclusions. So I was just trying to cover all the points, that's why it's just.
Yep, that's all good. Yeah, I just don't want like a 10-page novel, right? Like I'm not
Yeah, just to the point.
exactly.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Real converts milliseconds to time codes. Oh, I realize what I'm doing wrong. Total time, that is not total time in seconds. All right, take care. Ooh, big time. Here we go. Absolute float is positive. Make literal float. Literal float, make pulsing value. How would do this? Power around. Square, square. Truncate. Wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll have to tackle this week. I'll figure this out. Spain. Date time. Minus time span. Okay. All right, take care. From seconds. Oh. Go. Hours. Minutes. Seconds. Milliseconds. Let's see if this works. Okay. Aha. Aha. Problem solved. Oh, yeah, I mean, that's honestly fine. Okay. Take care. Thank you. Uh,